What are the pros and cons of buying mailing lists? Our team has got solicited by companies trying to sell us this service, and this is new territory for us, so we're hoping you might be able to help.
So I don't know, maybe my like instinct for like when someone's trying to sell me something, I'm instantly like, no, I don't want that. Right? As soon as someone like is
Yes.
like, if I'm looking for it, like that's great. I'm happy to talk to somebody who's selling something. But if you're just wandering in off the street trying to sell me something, my shield's up, right?
Yeah.
So I would be extremely hesitant in purchasing mailing lists if it's not something that you're initiating as part of a comprehensive development program. So if you are like where mailing list purchases generally start is if you're doing like a direct mail acquisition campaign and you're trying to get new donors and you think, okay, the people that are interested in my mission may be the same people in my community that read the New Yorker. So maybe I need to buy my community's subscription list to the New Yorker because then that might be a good, we think that there's an intellectual fit for the people that read that magazine to the people that are interested in what we're doing, right? So it's a legitimate thing, but it needs to be part of that comprehensive plan and you need to really, really think about it. And there are companies out there that can help you make those kinds of decisions that think about those things all the time. Again, they're trying to sell you something, they get paid per piece. And so you have to kind of take everything with a grain of salt. I remember having a very, very heated, long argument with someone who thought that buying ad space in a newspaper was going to be a really great way to acquire donors, which based on the circulation and the quality of the newspaper we were talking about was a very questionable thing to suggest. So I think you need to like use make sure your brain is on and fully engaged when entering into those conversations. But that doesn't mean that it's not a bad idea, right? Like getting connected to people who may be interested in your mission that you're not connecting with directly. Mail is still, I don't know. I still look at the pieces of mail that come through my mailbox, even though I had a conversation with somebody a couple of weeks ago who's like furious that the food bank, I think it was a food bank, was sending him mail and it had his name spelled wrong. And he's told them a million times to correct his name spelling. And it keeps coming as and then another nonprofit will show up and that name will be spelled wrong too. So he thinks that the food bank sold his name to another nonprofit, which, and I had to tell him, I'm like, the likelihood of that happening is almost zero. Like nonprofits don't share mailing lists. Like we just don't do that. That's our private information. No. That's not like most likely your name is spelled wrong on your New Yorker subscription. And both of them bought mailing lists from the New Yorker, which is why it's like that. Right. So don't blame the nonprofit. Blame your bad handwriting on whatever pledge card you filled out. Right. So yeah, people get so upset about mail. I don't know why, but I don't know. I go to the mailbox. I take everything out. I do tear a lot of things in half and put them in the trash before reading it, but I also like reading direct mail. I think I'm an outlier that I'll read any direct mail piece that anyone sends me just because I'm interested in what it says.
I think you are an outlier. And you couldn't be that much of an outlier though, because there is proof, right? That direct mail and effective direct mail campaigns, particularly done in a comprehensive effort and in strategy, work. But yeah, I'm just the opposite of you, Andy. I get the direct mail pieces and it doesn't matter how the closest they'll get me to opening it is if it truly looks like handwritten and it's like a different odd, right. And it's an odd shaped sort of envelope or card. Like, I'm like, oh, now I'm intrigued. And, but yeah, I don't know. Back to what you said though, I think doing the research, I think that people who have found a direct mail or purchasing mailing lists that are targeted, I think they would say to you, right, it could help broaden your donor base, and it depends on how you go about it. It could take a huge outlay of cash. It could also not. So depending on if you want to start small and sample, I've seen organizations do it in a smaller, right, like a pilot, and do it consistently, because they always say it's not just going to be one time, right? You're going to have to get 3 different pieces before you're probably going to get whatever the stats are about someone to actually maybe write you the check I don't think people even write checks anymore, but whatever, go online and send the donation. But I think you can start small and work your way up, but back to what you said, I don't think it's going to be a quick fix. Like any, it's not, it is going to take some expense. It is going to take a strategy, and it's not going to be just one and done. Great. We bought this mailing list and now we have reached out once or twice and the skies have parted and we're getting all this new money. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah. And I would make sure that the vendor for your mailing list is reputable too, that they're actually getting a real mailing list and you're not just getting garbage. And the way you can figure that out usually is like one of the first pieces you send, you want to send first class so that the bad addresses can all be sent back to you rather than sending everything pre-sort standard with the nonprofit rate. And that's another way, if you can throw it away without ever looking at it. If the stamp says pre-sort standard in the corner, it means it's junk mail automatically. You don't even have to open it. And, since we're talking about direct mail, like I know, Stacey, you'll open something if it looks like it's handwritten. Like I dislike being tricked. I don't, if the piece of mail looks like it's like a Christmas card and it's coming around Christmas and I open it up and it's garbage, like that puts I get a bad feeling from that. Like you just tricked me. I have a bad feeling about your organization. Again, and we say this all the time, like, we are not the target market. We know too much to be the target market. So take this with a grain of salt. I hate being tricked by direct mail. I open it because I want to see what you're doing. I want to learn about your organization. I want to see how you're soliciting people, like what the language today is. How are people talking about things? I want to know the good stuff. But if you like think that just by getting me to open it, they're like, all of a sudden I'm going to fall into a hole and hand me my credit card to get out of it. Like that's never going to happen. So don't send me tricky mail. Don't do that.
and I think, it's interesting, Andy, just because I'm going to go into this a little bit because you brought it up. I mean, we're an example of two people, right? Who are, we're not your typical audience, but we are two people who have two very different approaches to how we receive and deal with this kinds of mail, right? So there's an example.
Yep.
But it's also, and it shows that either approach could potentially work. So it is also doing a little bit of like, what is the demographic? Is it different? Or do men and women, is it whatever, think about it differently? I'm sure people who have much smarter than me have studied this and could tell you, but like, right. It's just because, and for me, I love it. I mean, I love something that looks different to catch my eye and not the typical same old, because I also feel that way. And for those who do good direct mail out there, please show me something that's different, because I feel like I could take 5 from all reputable, amazing organizations, 5 direct mail pieces, open them up, and it is the same, because it works. They know this is how the font I need to use. This is the length it needs to be. This is the poignant story and the picture. And I'm just like rolling my eyes. So when I get something that looks different, I go, cool. Like you're actually, at least I don't look at it as trying to trick me. I go, good for you for doing something different, because I'm sort of tired with this board, like this same kind of approach. So anyways, there's 2 very different perspectives, just to confuse you further.
I think we need a guest expert, maybe not on this question, but just in general about direct mail. We haven't had one for a really, really long time. And I want to ask if are we still stuck with Courier New? Like, is that the only typeface we're allowed to use? Like, because does the paper have to be that thin? Like all these questions that I think, were true statements. I want somebody to actually defend that. So
I love that. I actually love it and would love to hear it. Yeah. And I would love to challenge that person. So let's file this away, Andy, when we get that guest expert. I would love to challenge that person to actually, so how do you make it feel unique and different than even though the tried and true model works, but how do we make it feel and look different? Because the same old doesn't work for everybody. So there you go. There's a whole episode, I bet, that will be coming to you, our listeners, shortly.
Nonprofit governance.
Nonprofit answers.
Nonprofit board. Nonprofit management.
Nonprofit marketing. Nonprofit resources.
Welcome to Nonprofit Everything, the podcast where hosts Andy Shurick and Stacey Wedding answer your questions about all things nonprofit.
Well, welcome everybody to another episode of Nonprofit Everything. I'm Andy Schuricht. I'm here with Stacey Wedding, and we're here to answer all kinds of nonprofit questions for you. The way this works is you email us questions, you text them to us, you catch us in the hallway, whatever you need to do, you get the questions to us and about nonprofit topics, preferably, because that's what we're good at. And we'll try to answer them. If we can't, we will rope in a guest expert, or if we just feel like talking to somebody, we'll rope in a guest expert for that too. So the way it works is you send us the questions and we go ahead and answer them. Stacey and I are always complaining about these intros and the outros at the end. Like, this is one part that's not like pre-planned for us, because when you send us questions, right, we have something to read and respond to. It's easy after a while.
Yes.
Like, we're getting better at it. But like, this part is a little bit too freeform for us. I guess it's just our personality. Yeah. We can't just riff. And so what we've decided to do, just for fun, is I have some cards that I got that are conversation cards. They're actually, they were provided to one of my children as an AmeriCorps program. So many of you are probably familiar with AmeriCorps. We get some pretty great AmeriCorps volunteers going through the program. So AmeriCorps does this program called Not My Kid, and it's about bullying. And it's basically to tell parents that, yeah, it's your kid is the problem, right? That's that's sort of the point of the cards, right? But they're conversation cards, and each one has a topic, and then you ask your child or an adult a topic, and then we can talk about that. But this is going to give us like a way to sort of talk about something that we don't have to really think about. So I'm going to pull a random card for Stacey, but before I do that, Stacey, do you want an adult topic or a child topic?
I don't think I was a child even as a child, so let's stick with adult. Maybe if
right,
I get more comfortable with this, over time. And I do want to say Andy's being kind when he says, we're not comfortable with riffing. I think he means I am not comfortable with riffing. I am like a preparer, planner. I am that person. I like to collect my thoughts because I feel like I sound like a bozo when I don't do that. So anyway, so this is a bit out of my comfort zone, folks. So drum roll, please send me all the positive vibes.
All right, here's your question. Are teachers role models today? Why or why not?
Oh, absolutely. Well, okay. All right. This will be analytical. I think it depends on the teacher. So I think just the fact that someone wants to go in the profession of being a teacher says a lot about them. They actually care. They must. I mean, I'm going to make this assumption that they care about improving lives, sharing, teaching, helping students grow. And that alone is just like a role model. I mean, I think that just sort of speaks to someone maybe giving up what other benefits they could have with a different kind of salary or career or position. And instead they're truly like serving students. So I absolutely think they're a role model. I think most teachers are amazing. I think sometimes, like any profession, you'll find a bad seed or two. But in general, I don't think that ever comes from them being a bad human being, but more so maybe they're burned out, or maybe the system isn't serving them in the way it should, or right. Like they miss the art of teaching, right? Like they get into, you'll hear teachers talk about, I'm becoming more of a disciplinarian, or like it feel more like I'm a babysitter instead of actually getting to teach. So I think sometimes you find teachers that have lost that spark because of the system failing them, or large class sizes, or fill in the blank. And for them, it's hard, but they still are role models because they've chosen to, make this a part of their life and help improve other lives. So absolutely, I would say hands down, for the most part, role model.
See, that wasn't that hard.
That wasn't that hard. I probably gave too much like detail on it, but I was like, I probably should be like short and sweet, going, yes, they're role models, and here's why. But
what a stupid question. Moving on.
I was like, first, like, duh, of course they're role models. So anyways, well, I can't wait to pick one for you, Andy. So we'll have to do that. If people want to stay tuned, maybe we'll do that on the exit, like when we're closing out. So just stay tuned. If you heard mine, you get to hear Andy's next. Organizations say We have an evidence-based program, or we want to develop an evidence-based program. Those and other organizations may not understand what an EBP, evidence-based program, actually is, or the time and resources required to establish one. Can you break it down for us? And then we got a nice little side note compliment saying, P.S. y'all are the best. So thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate the love.
We need the validation every once in a while, especially when we read a question like, I don't know. No. But this one's actually pretty straightforward. So what an evidence-based program is and I think I know like where this question's coming from. I'll just start here. I feel like I know where this question's coming from because it's one of those terms that kind of gets thrown around. And it actually has like a very specific technical meaning. And the people that are throwing it around, I'd say a lot of time maybe don't realize there's a technical meaning to it and then are just using it inappropriately, which is apparently making the hair on somebody's back of their neck stand up, right? So, right. so what an evidence-based program is like something where there's actual, real, scientific, scholarly research which proves that the thing you're doing is going to result in the outcome that you say it is. So it's not like we feel like this is probably right, or everybody else is doing it, or it's common sense, or anything else other than there's actual like studies that are done by universities and they're peer reviewed, and they may have lots of other studies that are longitudinal and have all this extra data that supports this exact intervention, which shows that it proves that what we say is going to happen is going to happen. And the reality is, and probably why this question is here, is because that's a really high bar. And in many kinds of organizations, like, I mean, I always go back to food banking because it seems so obvious. It's like such a straightforward thing, right? There's probably not evidence-based program that like feeding people makes them not be hungry anymore. Like, even though that's like totally obvious and it's like, you can't get any more straightforward than that. Like, it's not something that someone has like gone through and said, like, if we provide services to pantries, does it alleviate hunger in a community? That may not exist because it's the kind of thing that's so obvious that no one's actually decided to do research projects about it, right? So you have to have the research project that would show this specific thing results in this specific outcome. And if you don't have the research, if you say that, like, we've got an evidence-based program, like the next question is, okay, show me the research, right? And it needs to be like real scholarly journals and things like that, and not, well, everybody thinks it's the true statement, right?
There's a really good real life example of this. So a lot of schools across the country have adopted this zero tolerance policy, right? And they associated with disciplinary practices and such. And it's interesting because it's like, it's just spread from anecdotally. We have this zero tolerance policy for these types of behaviors and, these types of things. And yet all the research actually indicates that those kinds of practices of zero tolerance are not effective, actually can take child backward. They're associated at the end of the day with negative student outcomes. And yet this is an example of something that when you look, like, is contradiction of what has happened, how it's been implemented. And it happens, let's be honest, a lot of organizations don't have the time and resource to devote to the true, or the partnerships to devote to the true research and science. So great, they hear someone else. Or how many times do you hear a board say, let's go look at what other industries or like what other sectors are doing in different parts of the country. Oh, that's the biggest, largest nonprofit. So let's take what their model is because they say that's a best practice. Mm-hmm. Well, anyone can throw around the word best practice, but evidence-based programming, evidence-based practices actually are something legitimate, to your point, Andy, right? Like, backed by science, rigorous research, the peer review, it's been tested out that it truly does have the outcomes it says it does in a controlled environment like any researcher would do. It's tough, right? I think that's something very few organizations actually can say they do. And yet, how many times are programs developed just because we hear someone say they're doing it and it's worked?
Yeah.
Yikes. I mean, that scares me for like large issues, right? Healthcare, education, juvenile justice, all the things, like all these things that you go, gosh, there has been science and research and scholarly articles. And are we not turning to those? Have we not leaned on those? We need to do a better job as a sector doing that. If we can't employ it ourselves for our own program, then how do we lean on larger research?
Mm-hmm. That's interesting because one of the things I like about this question is it kind of opens up a new, different area to talk about, which is like, how do you know if what you're doing is the right thing? Like, even if we're not worried about, because you can, I mean, if you're in a particular field, if you're working on a specific issue, and your mission says that you're supposed to be doing this, it's not beyond you to go out and look and say, what research is out there that supports programs that are in my mission area? I mean, that's something you can absolutely do and sort of learn new things. I think a lot of ways that we learn things are, again, from other people that are in the same line of work, with this sort of assumption that if someone is paying another organization to do it and that organization is effective at it, that must be the right way to solve the issue, right? If they're raising money, but then like that takes you down this additional path of like, well, then maybe that's just something that's easy to raise money for and not something that's really an effective program to solve this particular issue. Maybe it's not the most effective. And we've talked about this a bunch of times. I use these examples all the time about things that donors find interesting that aren't necessarily the most effective thing, but we continue to do them because donors find them interesting. We've like decided, the whole universe flips around the other way, and we're thinking about like what's going to get us the most revenue, and then maybe we can deploy some of that in a way that's going to be effective towards reaching our mission, and not the other way around, because it's a lot harder to do. It's like if it's really this weird little technical detail, and we found out that, just doing this one thing this one way, the research says that's going to have an effect, but you can't convince donors to pay for that. Like, who cares? It's completely useless information if you can't have someone funding that thing in the back end. So I find this, I don't know, I'm like speechless because it's such a difficult thing to think about. And most, like you said, most nonprofits just don't have the resources to do that research themselves because it's expensive, it's time consuming, it takes years. You just can't do it.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you look at articles that talk about the barriers of it, they talk about time, like nonprofits need to show proof of concept or proof of impact, right? Funders want that, donors want to see that now. And so we have to also educate those donors who are asking for that. This is going to require this, right? Like This doesn't just happen. And that takes time. And it's also some of the barriers they also talk about related to evidence-based programs and practices are just that the research is only one piece of it. So great, you have research. Now, what does that mean for every other part of, there's the buy-in to first get the funding or the support and expertise to do the research. It's finding the expertise. It's doing the research. Great. Now we have the research findings. What does that mean for our entire program model, perhaps our entire kind of business model as an organization? And then the communication of that, the program redesign. It's multi-layered, right? And the research is just one piece of it. So it's not to discourage people. I am such a fan of true evidence-based programs, but it's a long journey. And yet it's a journey that I think we're going to have to continue to strive to work toward getting funding to support nonprofits to do, because I think funders are becoming more expectant of outcomes and impact that is, and particularly more sophisticated funders, not your little donor who, just says, oh, I have this idea. Why don't you try to do your program like this? But like the true funders and foundations that are the large national foundations in larger scale, they truly want to see, they want to see evidence-based programs. So if you want to compete in that field, you're going to have to get into it.
Yeah. And that doesn't even get into the fact that if you go with research that exists, like, so if you just look at journals and things like that, the stuff that gets printed in journals is only the stuff that had some kind of positive result. So they
Right.
never, like the journals would be 50 times longer if every time they couldn't reject the null hypothesis. And they're like, we thought this was the reason for this. And it turns out it's not. So nobody publishes that. So like all of the things that don't work don't show up in journals. So the fact that it doesn't exist doesn't mean it works and no one's thought of it yet. It means it maybe doesn't work and someone's already tested it, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't interesting enough to create a research paper around. So that's like, it just becomes even that much harder to come up with, like, for this particular program, is there research available that supports it that we can then say we have an evidence-based program. It's just a really hard thing to do.
And to your point, I would really love to also see the research, the findings that show just the opposite, or it didn't work. And like that is valuable information too. Then at least you're like, okay, well, that's not quite it. So we don't know what it is yet, but that's not it either. Like, that's valuable. So,
yeah.
Well, if only we could, change the world, Andy.
We need our magic wands again.
Yes. We are considering conducting exit interviews of departing staff. Do you have any advice on who should conduct these interviews? And can you share some sample questions we might want to ask?
I've heard this one so many times, like for years.
Like
people think, this exact question about doing exit interviews. And I don't know that you're going to learn anything in an exit interview that you don't already know. And also the people that are giving the exit interviews, if they are smart, are not going to say anything bad about anybody or anything ever, because that's the last thing that you or anybody else your organization wants to hear. And so why would they put that out there? Because the next time they go get a job, somebody's going to call and say, hey, I'm calling to get a recommendation for, I see this person worked for you for 3 years. Can you tell me anything about them? Right? And some smart organizations are like, I can tell you rehire status, but that's it, because I don't want to be sued. But some organizations, especially smaller nonprofits, are going to be like, oh my God, like I thought she was happy. And then when their exit interview came around, she said she was miserable because of this and this and this and this and this. And then they've just torpedoed your next job, or 2 jobs from now. So no smart employee is ever going to tell you anything that is going to be meaningful to you. And the things they are going to tell you are things that you probably already know. Right? Things like, yeah, you're right, that is a miserable job. Or, yeah, you're right, we underfunded that position and probably needed to pay them more. Right? All the things you already kind of know is what they're going to tell you. I have never, I don't know. What about you, Stacey? Have you ever seen an exit interview process that was even remotely not terrible?
I'm not as anti-exit interviews as you. I do lean in the direction you're leaning. However, I've seen them done very rarely, but well, when you really are thoughtful about not only who gives the exit interview, but also the types of questions asked. So not questions necessarily that are going to put an exiting employee in a position to badmouth their boss or the organization, because as you said, smart people aren't going to do that. And people who are going to do that, you probably already know it because of whatever. So I think that the key is who you have interviewing them and what types of, I don't think you're ever going to get as much from somebody. I guess it depends. There's the caveat, right? I think if someone has a really healthy, great relationship with their immediate supervisor, then maybe they will share some things that could be really helpful in the hiring process. So as an example, did you feel valued, or was there a way we could have as an organization made you feel valued? Did you feel like your voice was heard? Things that, let's talk about the role you had with the organization, and now we've got to replace you. So what would you change about the role to make it someone else more successful in it? So things like that are less about how was your manager or how was whatever. Did the expectations, what you saw when you came into the organization on the job description, did those expectations meet reality? I think those are things that I would, even if I was wanting to stay in good favor with the organization, answer honestly, because if I cared at all about, I guess it depends on why I'm leaving, right? But if I got another job or got a promotion or I'm moving or fill in the blank, or I'm just moving on up, then I want to help the organization because I cared about it and I gave it some time. And I know, again, this is so situational, but so it feels like it shouldn't be like we do an exit interview with every employee, but it feels like maybe there's an opportunity to have just a conversation and not even call it an exit interview, but sort of, can we just have a conversation before you leave? I really want to learn and grow. And like, if I'm the boss, I'm saying that, and I want to set this up and I want to set the next person up for success. What advice do you have for me? Like, I think that could be, or if you're not the direct, if that person is uncomfortable with it and you have someone else asking them, like, I think that could be really helpful. And I think that's where I've seen it start to work for organizations when they take that approach. But to your point, like, there's so many pitfalls with this, in my opinion. I kind of cringe and go, oh. I mean, I would love an HR expert to say what they think, because they might be like, oh yeah, like, I would love to know what they would think about this.
No shade on our HR experts. I don't want to know.
And I don't mean that. And I don't mean that in shade with shade.
Because I'm about to say that I don't want an HR expert to tell me, because they're going to 100% recommend an exit interview. And I think the sort of unstated assumption with why an exit interview could be effective, which is kind of what you're proposing, right, is that because the employee is leaving, they then are freed up to give more information than they would have given while they were still in that role. Is that right?
Yes.
So to which I would say it's too late. Like, you need to be working with your employees while they still work with you, and you need to be able to have an honest, direct line of communication with your employees about how the job is going. Do we need to restructure it? Like, what can I do better as your manager? Like, all those things need to happen, like, while the ship is moving and not as the people are jumping off of it. Because at that point, you've already lost the employee for whatever reason. And maybe it is, you're right. Maybe it is a good reason. Maybe like they just got this awesome job that they've been waiting for years and years. And that happens all the time, right? Somebody gets a new role and they're like, yeah, I'm just leaving because this new thing is so great, right? In which case, maybe you are going to get a little bit of new information from them. But if someone's leaving for any other reason, that's stuff you should have found out about before they decided to leave. Especially with good employees, right? Because the good employees are the smart ones like us that are never going to say anything truthful in an exit interview. Like, they're never going to say anything that could potentially jeopardize any future relationship that they may need to have, right? Regardless of what the situation was like. And I mean, I know you and I both have had plenty of conversations, not on the air, about like, wow, like, how did we let that happen, right? But nobody that we worked for at the time knew about it or found out about it as we left either, right?
Absolutely. And and I have another layer to add to this, because I agree about it needs to be happening while someone's an employee, during employment. Absolutely, this needs to happen. And it still is never too late, because if I, for some reason, screwed up and didn't do it the way I should have, at least I would rather get something, right? Like, there's something I can learn from it. Shame on me. I should have done it while the person was employed. But if I didn't, for whatever reason, maybe, whatever, like, at least now I do have info to help me be a better boss manager, or whomever collects the info to help me be a better boss manager. I guess I also the other thing I wonder with this, and this is not a fair comparison, but I am going to share it. So I have done several board member exit interviews for departing board members. And boards are a little different, right? Because it's all volunteers and many people don't give it the time that's needed to actually grow and cultivate a strong board. So that sort of ongoing, the way you would as an employer, is a little different, I think. And it would be great if it was similar, like that you're actually caring and asking board members for feedback along the way. I just don't see that happening much. But I also have seen in those kinds of situations, the board member is never going to talk to a fellow board member They're never going to want to talk to the ED or CEO. So then in that case, the way it worked is by having a trust somebody, it's got to be someone they trust. So in the case when I was brought in, it was just because I had a long-standing relationship with the organization and each board member. So like they knew I wasn't going to take, if they were really blunt during an exit interview, and that was part of the expectation on the front end. Listen, I am not taking what you share with me verbatim. I am taking this in a way to to productively summarize it to help the board be stronger moving forward. You need someone you can trust, though, right? Because how many times would someone be like, yeah, sure, yeah. Stacey, right? Like you're going to actually say, you're going to quote me exactly what I said. And I actually think sometimes, and I've learned from this too, right? Sometimes direct quotes can be dangerous. I've made this mistake before where I've provided those, and it's hard because is that really serving anybody? So I think it's always got to be like, if you are going to do it, it's got to be someone the person trusts and can open up to. The person needs to understand what you're going to do with the info and how it's going to be framed. And hopefully they trust you enough to know that's the way it'll be, the process and how it'll be honored. And then it's got to be the right sets of questions. So those are, so I don't want to say nay forever on exit interviews. I just want to say I think they need to be a little more carefully thought out.
Yeah, I agree. I think exit interviews for board members are fine. I don't have a problem with that at all because the power dynamic is different, right? When you're doing an exit interview for a board member, that board member is free to say the truth and it's not going to have any effect on their future life at all. Like your organization was terribly run. I had a miserable time. The gala event was boring. The red wine that was served was terrible and I'm never coming back, right? Like they could say whatever they want and nothing's bad is going to happen to them ever again, right? Because they're board members. Yeah. So staff, power dynamic is very different. I think you just need to take that in. I mean, if you can bake that in, if you can figure out a way to construct an exit interview so that the person you're interviewing feels safe and knows that the information that they're giving to you is not going to be used against them in a year or 2 years because the ED has a big ego or whatever, then yeah, maybe you can glean some good information, I guess. Yeah.
Hey, everybody, you made it through another episode of Nonprofit Everything. Andy and I so appreciate you. We love you for listening. We appreciate your loyalty, and your questions are just out of this world. We learn something every time we get your questions, so keep those questions coming. It's what builds these episodes. So just take a moment when you get done today and text us, call us, go to nonprofiteverything.com, email us, find us wherever, and just ask us your question. I have even been having people leave me voice notes with questions these days. So get fancy with it. If you know how to reach us, you know how to ask us a question. And if you don't know how to reach us, you can find us easily on nonprofiteverything.com. So there's a big ask a question button. So you all have been waiting for it. I just know you are like sitting with bated breath, waiting for the question I'm about to ask Andy. You probably heard at the beginning, right? He teed it up. We're trying to mix up the openings and closings. And so Andy decided he was going to go with a card designed for kids. So here is Andy's question. Andy, what do you do to cheer yourself up when you feel down?
Aw. That's such a good question. I feel like I need to ask my kids that question too.
I know.
I go outside. I had a long time ago, I had a boss and we had some, like, it was typical nonprofit scenario, right? Where everything's going wrong. People are yelling at you. It's not working out. And his solution was always like, and we were annoyed because he would disappear. Like he'd be like, where'd he go? And one day he just said, like, if it just gets too much and you just need some time, just go outside and go wander around. And luckily we were someplace where it's not like the middle of the city. Like you can walk around and it was actually a nice place to go outside and walk around outside. And I still do that to this day. Like anytime I'm just like not feeling it or need some motivation, I just go outside. I don't have a phone. You don't listen to music. You just walk and you let your eyes look at what your eyes look at and your ears bring in what your ears are going to bring in. And I find it, I never return not cheered up. That works every single time. It doesn't matter what it is. Just being outside and listening to noises and crunching rocks under your feet that just does it for me 100% of the time, for sure.
I love it. I hope our listeners will take a page from that book and walk outside when you need to be cheered up, because there's brain science behind that too. So whether you knew it or not, Andy, you're a scientist with what you're doing.
And don't listen to us while you do it. Like, no music, no noise, no podcast. Like, just be outdoors. It's amazing.